The Slam Masters series started with Saturday Night Slam Masters, aka a wrestling game that was developed by Capcom and initially released for arcades in 1993. Slam Masters was Capcom's attempt to make an original wrestling game and draw in audiences who flocked to similar titles like Tecmo World Wrestling, the Fire Pro Wrestling series, and officially licensed wrestling games like WWF WrestleFest, WrestleMania the arcade game, and many, many, many others. To Capcom's credit, it was one of the best wrestling games of the early 90s, partially because most developers had no idea what they were doing with the genre to begin with. Most developers were trying to make a wrestling game with fighting game moves or a fighting game with wrestling rules, but Capcom walked the line between the two extremes and found a workable solution. Slam Masters had pitfalls, submissions, and countouts, one-on-one matches and battle royales, showboating, special moves, foreign objects thrown into the ring, brawling outside of the ring, all of the best things about wrestling games in its day, in a prototypical form of the complete package that modern audiences have come to know and love. Another boon for the game, and one of the reasons that Slam Masters still holds up today, is because the team that worked on the game built its foundation around the mechanics of Street Fighter II, one of Capcom's flagship titles. In addition to punches, kicks, and grabs, each character has special moves, performed with the rolling or charge motions and button presses that most tourney fighter players are familiar with, and an especially strong throw called the Super Slam. The Super Slam is essentially a finishing move, and it's a character's flashiest technique. It requires longer inputs, which gives opponents more time to break the hold, but it can be used at any point in the match, and it does more damage than any other single move in the game. Slam Masters also had a rage mechanic that was similar to Samurai Showdown's rage mechanic, but with the former, characters would only become enraged if they lost a lot of health in a short amount of time, and rage would modify certain moves to increase damage instead of giving a large overall buff. Slam Masters mixed these old and new gimmicks with a solid aesthetic. The game has 10 characters, and all of them have around 8 to 12 throws, including pinning throws, as well as standing strikes, running strikes from either the middle of the ring or off the ropes, moves off the turnbuckle, attacks to the outside, and even context-sensitive attacks that are unique to specific fighters and also match their gimmicks perfectly. That's a lot of action for an arcade game from 1993. Most people assume that the game was released on Capcom's Capcom Play System board, one of the earliest multi-game boards, but it was actually released as a title for the Capcom Play System Dash, an expanded version of Capcom's original CPS-1 board, and another product of Japan's love affair with the apostrophe. To be fair, it was essentially the same as the CPS-1. Its most notable addition was an early version of the Q sound chip, the one that has the cool logo and startup screen that plays when later Capcom arcade games were booting up. You know the sound it makes. Still, it's worth noting that Saturday Night Slam Masters was a stepping stone between the CPS-1 and 2, as those boards played host to some of the most influential arcade boards of all time, and the game also illustrates how much Capcom could get out of the CPS-1 near the end of its lifespan. Anyway, from what I see and hear on the internet, Slam Masters did well when it was released, and even better when it was ported to home consoles, namely the Sega Genesis, Super Nintendo, and the Town Marty. One of the big hooks of the game back when it was released, at least in Japan, were the promotional pictures and character portraits, which were illustrated by Tetsuo Hara, the artist who drew and co-authored Hokuto no Ken, also known as the Fist of the North Star in English-speaking territories, which is also known as Ken, Survivant de l'Enfer, in France. One thing that's often said about Hara's involvement in the game is that he also designed almost every character in it. Hara isn't credited for it in the game, so I don't know if Capcom's just being picky or if it's just a bit of confusion, but it's probably true. I mean, look at Greater. Just look at him. Later on, Slam Masters gained more attention in the 2000s when people were trying to determine Street Fighter lore. as the game contains various references to the Street Fighter and Final Fight series. But nowadays, the main reason people care about the game is because it features the Mayor of Earth, Mike Hagar. But rewind all the way back to '93, and all people cared about was that it was a fun wrestling game, so Capcom quickly developed and released a sequel/update, Muscle Bomber Duo. Despite being released in both Japan and Europe, Capcom kept the Muscle Bomber moniker. Muscle Bomber Duo dropped the one-on-one mode, focusing on battle royales instead, and made changes to the controls, such as the ability to block, a dedicated grab button, and a few other tweaks. Capcom based these changes on one of their earlier beat-em-ups, 1991's The Knights of the Round, but thankfully, they were not one-to-one changes. Duo probably wouldn't have been well received if characters could tire themselves out after blocking for a few seconds. Following Muscle Bomber Duo, Capcom released the final game in the series, Slam Masters 2, Ring of Destruction, in late 1994 on the CPS-2. This title is more of a traditional tournament fighting game. It focuses only on one-on-one matches, only allows players to move left and right, and removes pins, submissions, ring-outs, weapons, and turnbuckle moves. The Japanese title, Super Muscle Bomber, The International Blowout, plays up the shift in gameplay by copying Super Street Fighter II's title card, but the European and NA titles are a bit tamer, and yet both games use the Super title flash when players execute a Super Slam. This is also the game where Hara got full credit for contributing to the series, and it's clear to see that he designed the new characters and did all the in-game portraits as well. Slam Masters 2 is an odd game, whether you compare it to the other games in the series or not. It has its detractors, who make one good point against it. It is a fighting game styled after Street Fighter, which was released during a time when everyone was trying to imitate Street Fighter 2. And the fact that Capcom themselves made it doesn't give it a pass. The game also has a lot of unorthodox features, such as a double health bar and super moves that are always available, and watching any given high-level combo video for the game is usually enough to make people ignore it altogether. But I stump for it whenever I can because I think it's a good game as is, and I don't make apologies for it because it was good back then and it still holds up now. Slam Masters 2 has 4 attack buttons and 1 dedicated grab button, one of the carryovers from Muscle Bomber Duo. And in addition to its traditional fighting game movement, characters can also dash by double tapping forward, backdash by double tapping backwards, or run by double tapping and holding forwards or backwards. Characters can also dash cancel their normal attacks, and this is a thing that enables the crazier stuff that people see, like 100% stun combos starting from Rage, or infinites. But it's not as easy to do as the combo videos make it seem. Something that lots of people can say about lots of combo videos, to be frank. Linking normal standing moves from dashing moves and vice versa requires tight timing, and if you're too close, you'll skid to a stop. Furthermore, movement is pretty loose overall, so being able to hit someone at the right spot to start those combos in the first place is difficult. The potential for long combos is present in the game, but it's not as if most people are experienced enough to drop Hagar infinites at the drop of a hat. Heck, I knew a guy who could do that and he didn't do it anyway because he was a cool guy. Slam Master 2 players are cool people, except for that one guy. You know the one. The attack buttons are what you'd expect from a Capcom game. Each one performs a different move in different states, and each button determines the strength of a special move that uses it. The big twist here is that there are 4 attacks instead of 6. The grab button, on the other hand, is considerably different. As with Muscle Bomber Duo, it grapples with the opponent rather than grabbing them outright, and players can grapple with standing or crouching opponents by pressing grab or down and grab respectively. After locking up, the character that started the grapple can follow up with a throw by pressing grab again, or fling the opponent into the ropes with an Irish whip, forcing them to rebound. The character being grabbed can tech the throw by pressing grab, but not after the throw starts. Characters can also do a running grapple by pressing quarter circle forward and grab, but the animation can't be cancelled. The thing about grabs in this game is that if you're within the right range, you can cancel any normal into a throw. Even the super slams are technically comboable. However, all throws can be escaped by pressing grab, even command throws and super slams, unless the opponent is stunned. so using them in combos always carries the risk of resetting the situation, unless again, it's a stun combo. Another important thing Slam Masters 2 retained was the wrestling ring setup for each stage. The ring is important not because of stage hazards or power-ups or anything like that, but because it adds some solid options for movement. While the rings have invisible walls at the edge of the screen, just like most other tourney fighters, it also has defined boundaries, signified by the ring ropes. This is important because players can run towards and rebound off those ropes at will, or fling their opponents into it with an Irish whip, even when the ropes are off-screen. This means that characters can freely run back and forth in either direction at top speed. Also, anyone that bounces off those ropes is invincible while they're touching them, although the character on the receiving end of an Irish whip can't stop running for a second or two. This can be used to escape dicey situations and bounce right back with an attack, or just jump out of the corner, under certain circumstances. It's a unique style of movement that's arguably Slam Masters 2's most distinctive trait, and something even modern fighters don't replicate, but could replicate, at least to a certain extent. Slam Masters 2 doesn't take advantage of its new formula as much as it could have, but it's a very good first attempt on Capcom's part. If it's going to be classified as a Street Fighter clone, it's easily the best one, but I think it deserves recognition as its own game. I'm always awestruck that the entire Slam Masters line began and ended in the space of 2 years, and experimented so often within that span of time when it could have just churned out the same thing 3 times over. It was a good series, and even up until recently I'd have been happy to see it come back. Then again, things change.